Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to talk about the serious game Values Spotlight. Now it's called Value Spotlight because the idea is you put a value that's important to you or your team or your organization under a spotlight, and you look at how that value is affected by the things that you do and the things that you produce. But it doesn't have to be a value that you play the game with. It could be absolutely anything. But we play with values because they're really quite important when it comes to teams and culture and organization. Culture is what emerges from repeated everyday habits, and if you build your values into your practices, as Scrum has, as we'll see in a second, then you can use those values and that practice integration to reinforce the habits that you want and to discourage the habits that you don't. So that's what this game is all about. It's about using values and this idea of putting them under a spotlight to try to reinforce the behaviors and shared everyday habits that you want to see inside your teams. And if you've got your values connected to your culture or your organizational priorities, then that's about shaping your team in the right culture for your organization. It's a really simple game, so let's see how it works. As with all the games, what we have is a description of what the game is about, why we might want to play it, and the rules of the game. How do we go about playing it? And just like some of the others, first we set our scope. What do we want to spotlight and what do we want to focus on? So we choose the value or the principle or the thing that we want to put in the spotlight, and then we choose the things that we want to consider with it. So what do I mean by that? Let's have a little look at the game board and we can see. So one of the practices that does this connection of values to the practice really well is Scrum. When we look at Scrum, we can see that Scrum has these values here, the Scrum values, and it's very clear. Successful use of Scrum depends upon people living these 5 Scrum values, and when those values are embodied by the Scrum team and the people they work with, the Scrum pillars of transparency, inspection, and adaptation come to life. And those values in Scrum are commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. So that's how we play the game. We first, for example, decide, let's look at the Scrum values. So let's take the Scrum values and we'll set them as cards, and I'll just drag them onto the board. So I've got commitment and focus, openness, respect, and courage. So we're going to go through those one at a time. Then we might play a game beforehand, which might be, for example, ranking those 5 values in order as to which ones we think we demonstrate most to least, and then maybe it's the one we demonstrate least that we begin with. So let's pick one at random. Let's just say, for example, openness. So I've got my value here. Now, what is it that we do in Scrum? Well, if we look at the Scrum practice, we can see that we do these 5 activities. We progress these 5 things, and we produce these 4 work products. So we could take all 14 of those elements, or we could take some subset. So one of the most obvious things to do is to look at the activities. So let's take, for example, the activities of the backlog refinement. I'll just put these into the token view. So I'm showing you some of the features here about switching between views of the elements so that you've got the right detail on your playing surface. So here we've got the 5 activities of Scrum. Now on the board there's a couple of post-it notes, so let's just drag a couple of those. And the object of the game is to identify what positive things can we do, what behaviors or habits do we want to see in each of these events that would demonstrate that us as a team are embodying the Scrum value of openness. Okay, so that's the object. And again, like with many of these games, you want to make it collaborative. You want to get everybody contributing. You probably want to take it in turns to propose things, or you do something like a liberating structure, 1, 2, 4, all, to brainstorm different ideas. But the idea here is you pick, for example, sprint planning, which is described here, and openness, which is described here, and we find maybe 2 or 3 examples of things that we can do that embody the value of openness. So in our sprint planning, how can we embody the value of openness? Well, maybe, for example, we make our sprint boards available for everyone to see. Don't hide it away. It's not just for the team, it might be available for all the stakeholders as well. So Make this a little bit smaller. So that's a good thing that if we did that, if we saw that happening, that would be a good indicator that we embody openness within our team. So we might have 2 or 3 examples of that. What about the opposite though? What might we do in our team that shows that we don't embody openness in our sprint planning meeting? So maybe, for example, here it might be the case that the product owner does all the talking. If one person is going to dominate all our decision making in our sprint planning, then that's not really embodying openness. It doesn't involve other people. It's probably compromising some of our other Scrum values as well. So that's how the game works. It's a really simple game, but really, really powerful. It allows us to really focus on things that matter to us. Now, even within Scrum, it didn't have to be the Scrum values that I've placed here. Maybe your organization has its own principles or values. Maybe you want to bring in the Agile principles or the Agile values. It doesn't matter which the value is, but anything you want to focus on and you want to encourage within your organization or within your team, playing this game and looking at the things your team does, so either the things they produce or the way they produce them or the activities that they do, and looking specifically at that one connection, that activity or that work product and this value, and focusing on how can I show that I'm embodying the value, because it's not just about saying I value openness, it's about proving I value openness. And I prove I value openness by being open, and you should be able to observe that. You should be able to see that I am doing that. And that's what we talk about with habits, shared everyday behaviors leading to cultural change. So if I constantly focus on proving and being open, then it starts to become second nature and my default behavior, and then that's changed the culture of my team a little bit towards being more open. Maybe then I can focus on a different value or a different priority or a different principle. And just as important as encouraging the desirable behaviors is discouraging the undesirable behaviors, which is why looking at the red undesirable behaviors is also really important. So what we end up with, if I just show you a quick example, is we might have had, in this case we're looking at the focus, we've got a bunch of examples here of how these 5 Scrum activities can encourage or discourage behaviors and habits that show that we embody a value of focus. And then what we can do, of course, is decide to do some things. Maybe we'll do something like rank them. So here we've said for our positive behaviors, which of those behaviors would have most impact on that value of focus? And of the undesirable behaviors, which of those behaviors is most likely to be seen in our team? So now I've got these 2 here, which feel like a couple of good actions to take. So let's reword those and say, I'm going to propose or prioritize improvements that are not impactful. That's something we should watch out for and make sure we don't do that, and evaluate how well we stuck to the goal and didn't get distracted. That's something we're going to make sure that we do. So a couple of ideas there for what you can do with your answers, and then you can of course turn that into an action or a to-do, or add it to the agenda for your retrospective. For example, that second one, which is about, as part of our retro, let's actually evaluate, did we get distracted? Maybe place our level of distraction on a scale of 1 to 10. Then we can track it every retro and just see if we're getting more or less distracted. And once we find ourselves always in the we never get distracted, we can switch to something else. So that's an example of the values spotlight game. You can play that with any 2 practice elements, and of course you can play it with any practice. You can play it with internal company things. You don't even really need to have the practice things on the right hand side. You can just play this with a sticky note. And of course, like many of these games, you can play them in person, you can play them remotely, and there's lots of facilitation tips and ideas also on the board.